People who have encountered a fairy often reflect on the experience, saying that it changed their life forevermore, that it altered the way they view the world around them, leaving them second-guessing every person and creature they see. Some poor souls spend the rest of their lives looking over their shoulder, never sure if or when the fairy will return. When I was in Norway, I heard many stories about Huldra, or forest fairies as they call them. One that has really stayed with me happened to a colleague of mine. He told me that he was out driving one day when he stopped on the road in the middle of nowhere to take a drink from his flask. He was stopped there for a few minutes, stretching his legs outside the car and just looking around, when he heard a loud knock or a single bumping sound coming from the bottom of his car, but there was absolutely no one around. Then the sound of a second knock came from under the car, and he didn't wait. He just got into his car, started the engine, and drove the hell away. He said, and he really believed, that he did that to avoid hearing the third knock, as it would have signalled a sort of invitation, an opening of the door for him to enter the fairies' world. He was genuinely terrified. There was once a midwife who lived on the Orkney Islands of Scotland. Her skills were well known throughout the islands. One evening she had just put her fish on to cook for dinner and was talking with her husband when suddenly a group of trolls entered the cottage and abducted her right before the husband's eyes. The midwife was taken in the darkness to a place she could only describe as underground, and there she assisted in the birth of a troll. After the birth, the midwife was carried back to her own home, and on entering the cottage, a full 2 weeks after the abduction, she asked her bewildered husband if the fish was cooked yet. A woman was one night lying awake while her husband slept, when the door suddenly opened and a tall, dark man entered of fierce aspect, followed by an old hag with a child in her arms, a little misshapen, sickly-looking thing. They both sat down by the fire to warm themselves, and after some time the man looked over at the cradle that stood beside the mother's bed with her baby boy in it, and he kept his eyes on it for several minutes. Then he rose, and when the mother saw him walking over directly to the cradle, she fainted and knew no more. When she came to herself, she called out to her husband and bade him light a candle. This he did, on which the old hag in the corner rose up at once and blew it out. Then he lit it a second time, and again it was blown out, and still a third time he lit the candle, and again it was blown out, and a great peal of laughter was heard in the darkness. On this the man grew terribly angry, and taking up the tongs he made a blow at the hag, but she slipped away and struck him on the arm with a stick she held in her hand. Then he grew more furious and beat her on the head until she roared. Then he pushed her outside and locked the door. After this, he lit the candle in peace. But when they looked at the cradle, lo, in place of their own beautiful boy, a hideous little creature, all covered with hair, lay grinning up at them. Great was their grief and lamentation, and both the man and his wife wept and wailed aloud for the loss of their child, and the cry of their sorrow was bitter to hear. Just then the door suddenly opened, and a young woman came in with a scarlet handkerchief wound round her head. "What are you crying for?" she asked, "at this time of night when everyone should be asleep?" "Look at this child in the cradle," answered the man, "and you will cease to wonder why we mourn and are sad at heart." And he told her all the story. When the young woman went over to the cradle and looked at the child, she laughed but said nothing. "Your laughter is stranger than our tears," said the man. "Why do you laugh in the face of our sorrows?" "Because," she said, "this is my child that was stolen from me tonight, for I am one of the fairy race, and my people, who live under the fort on the hill, thought your boy was a fine child, and so they changed the babies in the cradle. But, after all, I would rather have my own, ugly as he is, than any mortal child in the world. So now I'll tell you how to get back your own son, and I'll take away mine at once. Go to the old fort on the hill when the moon is full, and take with you 3 sheaves of corn and some fire, and burn them one after the other. And when the last sheaf is burning, an old man will come up through the smoke, and he will ask you what it is you desire. Then tell him you must have your child back, or you will burn down the fort and leave no dwelling place for his people on the hill. Now the fairies cannot stand against the power of fire, and they will give you back your child at the mere threat of burning the fort. But mind, take good care of him after. Tie a nail from a horseshoe round his neck, and then he will be safe." With that, the young woman took up the ugly little imp from the cradle in her arms, and was away and gone before they could see how she got out of the house. Well, next night, when the moon was full, the man went to the old fort with the 3 sheaves of corn and the fire, and burned them one after the other. And as the second was lighted, there came up an old man and asked him what was his desire. "I must have my child again that was stolen," he answered, "or I'll burn down every tree on the hill, and not leave you a stone of the fort where you can shelter any more with your fairy kindred." Then the old man vanished, and there was a great silence, but no one appeared. On this the father grew angry, and he called out in a loud voice, "I am lifting the 3rd sheaf now, and I'll burn and destroy and make desolate your dwelling place, if my child is not returned." Then a great clamour was heard inside the fort, and a voice said, "Let it be! The power of the fire is too strong for us. Bring forth the child." And presently the old man appeared, carrying the child in his arms. "Take him," he said, "by the spell of the fire and the corn you have conquered. But take my advice. Draw a circle of fire with a hot coal this night round the cradle when you get home, and the fairy power cannot touch him any more, by reason of the fire." So the man did as he was desired, and by the spell of fire and of corn the child was saved, and he grew and prospered. And the old fort stands to this very day safe from harm, for the man would allow no hand to move a stone or harm a tree. And the fairies still dance there on the Rath when the moon is full, to the music of the fairy pipes, and no one hinders them. I hope you enjoyed these unsettling true tales. I have loads more creepy fairy stories for you in the coming weeks, so be sure to subscribe and hit that notifications bell too, so you don't miss any. Until next time, stay curious and be kind. Cheerio!